I've completed the final 3 parts of The Shot That Counts, bringing Clara's journey to a satisfying conclusion. Parts 8 to 10 cover approximately 3,000 words and show her transformation from the aftermath of her heroic shot through her evaluation and eventual assignment as an instructor at Fort Benning. The narrative maintains the core themes of hidden competence and quiet resilience, while bringing the story full circle with Clara now in a position to help other struggling marksmen who might be overlooked by conventional evaluation methods. The symbolic bullet becomes a legacy item passed from instructor to student, representing trust, potential, and the responsibility that comes with precision shooting. The story concludes with Clara having not only redeemed herself, but positioned to prevent others from experiencing the same institutional oversight that nearly ended her marksmanship career. Her evolution from overlooked supply clerk to respected instructor completes a powerful arc about perseverance, hidden talent, and the importance of second chances in recognizing true capability. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The industrial dryers hummed their endless song in the sweltering canvas tent that served as forward operating base Harrington's laundry facility. Clara Reyes moved with mechanical precision, her small hands folding each uniform with crisp, perfect edges. Desert camouflage, woodland camouflage, the occasional dress uniform. Each received the same meticulous attention that had become her trademark over 3 years of duty. At 24, Clara stood barely 5'2" in her desert boots, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun so tight it made her temples ache by evening. The other soldiers called her precise behind her back, sometimes with admiration for her flawless work, more often with the condescending tone reserved for those who'd never seen real action. "Another load coming in from 2nd Platoon," called Specialist Nia Alvarez as she wheeled in a cart of dirt-stained fatigues. Nia was everything Clara wasn't. Tall, boisterous, with an infectious laugh that could cut through the base's perpetual tension. She was also the only person who knew about Clara's midnight practice sessions behind the equipment shed. "Thanks, Nia." Clara's voice barely carried over the mechanical noise. She set down the uniform she'd been folding, Sergeant Martinez's judging by the name tape, and began sorting the new arrivals. Bloodstains, she noted with practiced detachment, not unusual for a combat zone. The distant thump of artillery had been background noise all morning, as constant as the desert wind. But something had changed in the last hour. The base's loudspeakers, usually crackling with updates and announcements, had fallen silent. Outside the tent, she could hear the rapid-fire chatter of soldiers moving with unusual urgency. "You hear anything about Delta's operation?" Nia asked, lowering her voice as she began loading another dryer. "Johnson from Motorpool said they went dark about 6 hours ago." Clara's hands stilled for a moment. Delta Force operations were classified, but rumors spread through a base like wildfire. If they'd gone dark, it meant trouble. Real trouble. "Probably just radio issues," Clara said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. She learned to read the rhythm of combat operations through 3 years of washing the evidence, the extra blood, the torn gear, the way certain units' laundry loads grew smaller after difficult missions. The sound that cut through the tent next wasn't the familiar thump of distant mortars. It was the sharp crack of rifle fire, much closer than usual. Then another, and another. Nia looked up from the dryer, her usual smile fading. "That's inside the wire." Before Clara could respond, the tent flap burst open. A figure stumbled in, bringing with him the acrid smell of cordite and the copper tang of blood. Captain Darius Cole, his Delta Force uniform torn and darkened with sweat and blood, clutched his left shoulder with one hand while his right gripped a Barrett M82 sniper rifle. Clara had never spoken to Cole, but everyone on base knew him by reputation. Decorated, competent, the kind of officer who led from the front. Right now, he looked like he'd crawled through hell. His eyes swept the tent, taking in the industrial washers, the folded uniforms, and finally settling on Clara. For a moment that stretched like eternity, they stared at each other across a pile of freshly pressed fatigues. Can you shoot? His voice was hoarse, urgent. Clara's mouth went dry. Sir, I... Can you shoot? He repeated, stepping closer. Blood seeped between his fingers where he pressed against his shoulder wound. Yes, sir. The words came out as barely a whisper. Without another word, Cole thrust the massive rifle toward her. My sniper's down. We've got hostiles with Overwatch on my team. They're pinned down 2 clicks north, and I need someone who can make a long shot. Clara stared at the weapon. The Barrett felt impossibly heavy in her small hands, but familiar. More familiar than it should have been for a supply clerk. Sir, with respect, Reyes is laundry detail. Sergeant Brick Henley's gravelly voice filled the tent as he pushed through the flop behind Cole. At 6'4" and built like his nickname suggested, Brick had the authority that came with 15 years of infantry experience and the scars to prove it. She's not combat qualified. Cole's eyes never left Clara's face. Are you qualified? The question hung in the stifling air. Clara felt the weight of both men's stares, the rifle heavy in her grip. Memories flooded back. Carter's Sniper Training Academy, the simulation that had ended her combat dreams, the official report that labeled her unsuitable for combat operations due to stress-induced hand tremors. But there were other memories too, the ones that she carried in secret. 5 consecutive shots at 1,000 meters, all center mass. The bullet she kept in her breast pocket, a gift from her instructor. The midnight hours spent maintaining skills that officially didn't exist. She used to be, Nia said suddenly, stepping closer to Clara's side. Before the medical discharge. Brick's expression shifted from skepticism to confusion. Medical discharge. Panic attack during a training exercise. Dropped my weapon. They said I couldn't handle the pressure. Cole studied her for a long moment, taking in her precise posture, the way she naturally handled the rifle despite its size. When was the last time you fired? Clara met his gaze directly. Last night, sir. The admission hung between them like a confession. Brick's eyes widened, but Cole just nodded slowly. Hawk Ellis took a round through the chest, best shooter in the unit, but he's bleeding out behind a rock. There's an enemy marksman with elevation advantage and perfect lines of sight. My people have maybe 10 minutes before they're overrun. Sir, Brick interjected. Regulations clearly state, regulations don't mean shit when my soldiers are dying. Cole cut him off. His attention turned back to Clara. The shot's 1,200 meters through a gap in the tree line. Wind is variable, target's camouflaged, and you'll get 1 chance before he relocates. Clara's hands weren't shaking. She noticed this in the same detached precision she brought to folding uniforms. 3 years ago in a training simulation, her hands had trembled so badly that she dropped her weapon. Now, holding a rifle that could determine whether American soldiers lived or died, they were steady as stone. I can make that shot. Cole's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Recognition, maybe, or desperate hope. Sir, this is insane, Prick protested. She's a supply clerk. If something goes wrong... Something's already gone wrong, Cole said sharply. My team is dying while we stand here debating. He looked at Clara again. You sure about this? Clara thought about the nights she'd spent in secret, practicing everything her academy training had taught her. Breathing techniques, sight alignment, trigger control. She thought about the bullet in her pocket, the one her instructor had told her to save for when a life depended on it. Yes, sir. Nia stepped forward, grabbing a radio from the equipment table. I'm going with her. Someone needs to coordinate with the team on the ground. Brick ran a hand through his graying hair, his internal struggle visible. Finally, he sighed heavily. If we're doing this insane thing, you'll need extra magazines. He moved to a locked cabinet, producing a key from his pocket. And if Colonel Hayes asks, you stole these. The heat hit Clara's face like a physical blow as they emerged from the air-conditioned tent into the desert afternoon. The base buzzed with controlled chaos, soldiers moving with purpose, vehicles being prepped, the distant chatter of radio communications coordinating the response to whatever had gone wrong with Delta's mission. Cole leaned heavily against a Humvee while a medic worked on his shoulder, but his eyes tracked Clara's every movement. As she approached, he held up his hand to stop the medic. "One shot," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command despite his weakened state. "That's all you'll get before he identifies your position and starts shooting back. Make it count." Clara nodded, slinging the Barrett across her shoulder. The weapon's weight felt natural, like putting on a familiar piece of clothing. "What's the target's position?" "Palm Grove. Elevated position about 300 meters northeast of my team's location. He's got excellent concealment and a clear field of fire on their position." Cole's eyes were already glazing slightly from blood loss, but his voice remained clear. "Nia has the radio frequency. My RTO will guide you in." The medic was already calling for a stretcher. Cole grabbed Clara's wrist with his good hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't let them die because of politics and paperwork," he said quietly. "You're the right person for this job, regardless of what your file says." As they loaded Cole onto the stretcher, Brick appeared beside Clara with a tactical vest and extra magazines. "Never thought I'd be arming a laundry clerk for a sniper mission," he muttered, helping her adjust the vest. "But Cole's right about one thing. Those boys are running out of time." Clara's mind drifted back 3 years, to the moment that had ended her combat career. The simulation had been routine until the unexpected explosion, the searing pain in her shoulder as shrapnel tore through her uniform. But what haunted her wasn't the physical trauma, it was the 4 seconds she'd fought to maintain her grip on the rifle, even as her body screamed in agony. 4 seconds that hadn't been recorded in any report. 4 seconds that hadn't mattered to the review board that stamped unsuitable for combat operations on her file. "Reyes," Brick's voice cut through her reverie. "You good?" Clara looked at him, then at Nia, who was checking the radio, then at the rifle across her shoulder. For 3 years, she had been the quiet girl who folded laundry with mechanical precision, the one who failed when it mattered. The cautionary tale about reaching beyond your capabilities. But late at night, when the barracks fell quiet and she slipped outside with her rifle, her hands never shook. In the darkness behind the equipment shed, she was everything Carter Academy had trained her to be. "I'm good," she said, and meant it. The radio crackled in Nia's hand. Any unit. This is Delta 2-6. We are taking effective fire from concealed sniper. Request immediate assistance. We have wounded and are running low on ammunition. 2 minutes until we're overrun." Clara checked her weapon one final time, chambering around with practiced efficiency. The bullet in her breast pocket felt warm against her chest, a reminder of the shooter she'd always been, despite what the paperwork said. It was time to prove that being underestimated could be its own kind of camouflage. The irrigation ditch ran north from the base perimeter like a concrete scar across the desert landscape. Clara dropped into it behind Nia and Brick. The Barrett's weight distributed across her small frame with surprising comfort. The concrete walls, cracked and weathered by years of desert extremes, provided cover but also trapped the day's accumulated heat like an oven. "Delta 2-6, this is base. We have assets moving to your position," Nia whispered into her radio, her voice steady despite the sweat beading on her forehead. "ETA 5 minutes to overwatch." The response crackled back immediately. "Copy, base. We're down to our last magazines. Whatever you're sending, it better be good." Clara pressed her back against the ditch wall, listening to the rhythm of gunfire ahead. Single shots, precise and measured, coming from an elevated position. Between each shot, she counted 8 seconds, 9, 7. The enemy marksman was taking his time, confident in his position and his target's inability to respond effectively.
"There." Brick pointed toward a cluster of palm trees about 800 meters ahead. "See that grove on the rise? That's where the bastard's shooting from." Clara brought her scope up, adjusting the focus with movements that felt automatic despite 3 years away from combat optics. The grove swam into clarity, tall palms providing natural camouflage, their fronds creating deep shadows that could hide a shooter. But something else caught her attention. "He's not in the trees," she said quietly. Brick frowned. "What do you mean?" "The angle's wrong. If he was firing from the grove, the trajectory would be steeper. He's firing from ground level, using the trees as a backdrop." Clara studied the terrain with the analytical precision she'd once brought to range estimation exercises. "There's a depression about 50 meters in front of the grove, natural firing position with excellent concealment." Naya looked between them, confusion evident on her face. "How can you tell that from here?" "Ballistics," Clara replied, never taking her eye from the scope. "The way the sound carries, the impact pattern on the rocks where Delta's pinned down. He's firing from a hide position that gives him a clear field of fire, but keeps him invisible against the tree line." The radio crackled again. "Base, be advised, we have movement on our eastern flank. This might not just be one shooter." Brick cursed under his breath. Should have known it wouldn't be simple. Clara continued scanning through her scope, building a mental map of the tactical situation. The Delta team was pinned behind a rocky outcropping about 300 meters from the enemy position. She could see the occasional flash of movement as they tried to shift positions, but the sniper's overwatch prevented any significant maneuvering. "There," she breathed, catching a momentary glint of reflected sunlight. "Scope lens, 11 o'clock from the center of the grove." Naya adjusted her radio, preparing to relay Clara's intelligence to the trapped soldiers. But before she could speak, the pattern of enemy fire changed. 3 rapid shots echoed across the desert, followed by an ominous silence. "Delta 2-6, report status," Naya called into her radio. The response was immediate and tense. "We're okay, but that son of a bitch is changing his game. Those shots weren't aimed at us, he was ranging something else." Clara felt a chill, despite the desert heat. "He knows we're here." Brick's hand moved instinctively to his rifle. "How could he know?" "Because he's good," Clara said, her voice grim. "Professional snipers don't just watch their primary target. They watch for responses, for rescue attempts. He saw movement from our direction, and now he's calculating ranges for multiple targets." The tactical situation had just become exponentially more complex. They weren't just hunting a sniper, they were being hunted by a sniper. "We need to move," Clara said, already calculating angles and approach routes. "He'll have this ditch ranged within minutes." They began moving north through the irrigation channel, staying low and using the concrete walls for cover. The ditch angled toward higher ground, which would eventually give Clara the elevation she needed for a clear shot, but it also brought them closer to their target's effective range.
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. After 200 meters of careful movement, Clara called a halt. Through her scope, she had a clearer view of the enemy position. The sniper had chosen his location well, a shallow depression that provided natural cover while offering excellent fields of fire in multiple directions. "Naya, tell Delta to shift positions on my mark," Clara said, her voice taking on the calm authority she'd learned at Carter Academy. "When they move, he'll have to choose between engaging them or maintaining overwatch on our position." "Roger." Naya relayed the message, then looked back at Clara. "What's the plan?" Clara studied the terrain one more time, calculating wind speed from the movement of dust and vegetation, estimating the exact range to target, considering the thermal effects of the desert heat on bullet trajectory. "I'm going to make him make a choice," she said. The low stone wall had probably been a property boundary once, before the war turned this section of countryside into a free-fire zone. Now it provided Clara with a stable shooting position 200 meters closer to her target. She settled behind it with practiced efficiency, the Barrett's bipod legs deployed and locked. Through her scope, the enemy position came into sharp focus. She could see the edge of what appeared to be a camouflaged hide, the kind of carefully constructed position that marked a professional operator. Whoever the shade was, he'd had time to prepare for this engagement. "Range 1,200 meters, Clara whispered to herself, adjusting her scope's elevation turret with precise clicks. "Wind 2 to 3 miles per hour, left to right. Temperature 115 degrees.
Beside her, Brick had taken up a supporting position with his M4, ready to provide suppressive fire if other hostiles revealed themselves. His earlier skepticism had been replaced by professional focus. Whatever his opinions about regulations and chain of command, he recognized competence when he saw it. "Delta's in position for movement," Nia reported quietly. "Waiting for your call." Clara settled into her shooting position, feeling the familiar ritual calm that had always come with precision marksmanship. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate dropped, and the chaotic sounds of the battlefield faded to background noise. This was the zone that had made her instructors at Carter Academy take notice, the ability to find perfect stillness in the middle of chaos. "Execute," she said. Through her scope, she watched the Delta soldiers break cover in a coordinated movement toward better positions. Instantly, the enemy sniper's attention shifted. She saw the muzzle flash as he engaged the moving soldiers, his rifle barrel visible for just a moment as he tracked his targets. Clara's crosshairs found the spot where she'd seen the muzzle flash, but she held her fire. One shot. That's all she'd get before he located her position and returned fire. She needed to be certain. The shade was good. After engaging the Delta soldiers, his position went completely dark again. No movement, no reflection, nothing to give away his exact location within the hide. Clara waited, her finger resting lightly on the trigger, fighting every instinct that told her to take the shot while she had a general target area. The radio crackled with urgent whispers. "Base, we made it to better cover, but we lost Henderson. He took one through the leg during the movement." Clara's jaw tightened. The shade had claimed another casualty while she'd hesitated, but taking a rushed shot would only reveal her position without guaranteeing a hit. In sniper warfare, patience was as important as marksmanship. Minutes passed like hours. Clara maintained her position, watching for any sign of movement from the enemy hide. Sweat trickled down her back despite the cooling effect of adrenaline. Beside her, Brick had taken up a supporting position with his M4, ready to provide suppressive fire if other hostiles revealed themselves. His earlier skepticism had been replaced by professional focus. Whatever his opinions about regulations and chain of command, he recognized competence when he saw it. Then she saw it, the briefest glint of metal as the shade adjusted his scope, probably scanning for the source of the Delta team's movement coordination. The glint lasted less than a second, but it was enough to confirm his exact location within the hide. Clara's breathing slowed to an almost meditative rhythm. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears, could sense the minute tremor of her pulse affecting her aim point. At the academy, they'd taught her to fire between heartbeats, in the natural respiratory pause that offered the steadiest platform. But as her finger began to apply pressure to the trigger, the shade did something unexpected. Instead of maintaining his overwatch on the Delta position, his rifle barrel swung toward her location. "He's made us," Brick hissed, recognizing the threat shift. Clara found herself locked in a duel of scopes across 1,200 meters of desert. Two snipers, each trying to acquire the other first, each knowing that the winner would be determined by fractions of seconds and millimeters of precision. The world narrowed to the view through her scope. She could see the dark outline of the shade's rifle barrel, could almost feel his crosshairs searching for her position behind the stone wall. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, ready to fire the moment she had a clear shot. But the shade was patient too, professional. He didn't expose himself with unnecessary movement or hurried shots. Like Clara, he understood that precision beats speed in the sniper's trade. The standoff stretched, taut like a wire, both shooters waiting for the other to make the first move, to expose themselves for the split second it would take to end the engagement. Then the radio shattered the silence. "Base, we've got more hostiles moving on our position from the west. The sniper's not alone." The new threat changed everything. Clara could hear the distant rattle of automatic weapons fire as the Delta team engaged multiple hostiles approaching their position. The sniper duel had become secondary to a larger tactical problem, but that might also be her opportunity. Through her scope, she saw the shade's rifle barrel shift slightly as he divided his attention between her position and the new engagement below. It was the first tactical error he'd made, and Clara knew it might be her only chance. She settled deeper into her shooting position, the Barrett's stock welded to her cheek. 1,200 meters was a long shot under ideal conditions. In desert heat, with variable winds and a partially concealed target, it was at the extreme edge of what most marksmen would consider possible. But Clara wasn't most marksmen. At Carter Academy, before the accident that ended her career, she'd been the top shooter in her class. 5 consecutive shots at 1,000 meters, all center mass. The instructors had called it exceptional. The official records had called it worthless after her medical discharge. "Brick," she said quietly, never taking her eye from the scope. "When I fire, put suppressive fire on the grove. Not at the sniper position, into the trees behind him. If he's got spotters, I want them keeping their head down."
"Roger," Brick replied, already shifting his rifle toward the target area. Clara's breathing fell into the rhythm she'd practiced countless nights behind the equipment shed. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out, hold for 4. On the 3rd cycle, at the bottom of her respiratory pause, she felt the perfect stillness that separated good shooters from great ones. The enemy sniper made his final mistake, a micro movement as he adjusted his position to better engage the Delta team below. For just an instant, Clara could see the outline of his head and shoulders through a small gap in his camouflaged hide. Her crosshairs settled on center mass. Range 1,200 meters, wind negligible, target partially concealed. In her mind, she could hear her instructor's voice from Carter Academy. Precision is the convergence of preparation and opportunity. Clara's finger compressed the trigger with the steady pressure of a hydraulic press. No jerking, no flinching, just smooth, consistent pressure until the firing pin released. The Barrett bucked against her shoulder with its massive recoil, the muzzle blast kicking up dust around her position. Through her scope, Clara watched the .5 caliber bullet cross 1,200 meters of desert air in just over 2 seconds. The round threaded through the gap in the shade's camouflage like a needle through cloth. The impact was instantaneous and final. The enemy sniper's rifle tumbled sideways as his position went completely still. "Target down," Clara announced, her voice calm despite the thundering of her pulse. Brick immediately opened fire on the grove behind the sniper position, his M4 chattering on full automatic as he swept the tree line. Whether there were spotters there or not, anyone in the area would be keeping their heads down. The radio erupted with excited chatter. "Base, enemy sniper is down. Repeat, Overwatch threat is neutralized. We can maneuver." Clara worked the Barrett's bolt, chambering a fresh round in case there were other threats, but her hands were steady as stone. No trembling, no stress response, just the calm professionalism that had always emerged when lives depended on her shooting. "Outstanding shot," Brick said, lowering his rifle as the sounds of battle shifted. With their sniper down, the attacking force was losing coherence, allowing the Delta team to regain tactical initiative. Clara felt no exhilaration, no triumph, just a quiet sense of completion, like finishing a particularly complex piece of laundry work. The job was done correctly, efficiently, with the precision that had always defined her approach to important tasks. Naya was coordinating on the radio, directing helicopter support and medical evacuation for the wounded Delta soldiers. The crisis was ending, but Clara remained in position, scanning for additional threats through her scope. The mission wasn't over until everyone was safely extracted. Movement ceased from sniper position, no signs of additional shooters in the grove. But even as she confirmed the kill, her mind was already moving beyond the tactical situation. This shot would be analyzed, discussed, recorded in after-action reports. The quiet supply clerk who folded laundry with mechanical precision had just made a 1,200-meter shot under combat conditions. There would be questions. There would be attention. There would be conversations about why someone with her capabilities had been relegated to supply duty for 3 years. For now, though, there were wounded soldiers who needed help. The UH-600 Blackhawks appeared on the horizon within minutes of Clara's shot, their rotors beating the desert air with the distinctive whoop-whoop that meant salvation for ground troops in contact. Clara had never heard a more beautiful sound. She and Brick provided overwatch while Naya coordinated the landing zones with the helicopter crews.
The Delta team had managed to extract themselves from their rocky cover and were moving toward the pickup point, carrying their wounded with the efficiency of soldiers who'd done this too many times before. There, Naya pointed toward the approaching figures. That's Corporal Ellis, Hawk. He's walking, so the chest wound can't be too bad. Clara watched through her scope as the Delta soldiers approached. Even wounded, they moved with the fluid professionalism that marked elite units. She could see Ellis supported by two other soldiers, his left arm immobilized, but his right hand still gripping his rifle. As the helicopters touched down, kicking up clouds of dust and debris, Clara finally relaxed her firing position. The Barrett felt heavier now, as if the completion of her mission had restored its full weight. She safetied the weapon and began breaking down her shooting position. "Reyes!" a voice called over the rotor noise. She turned to see Ellis approaching, his face pale but his eyes alert. Blood had soaked through the bandages on his chest, but he was walking under his own power. "That was my shot," he said when he reached her position. 1,200 meters, single round, moving target under pressure. He paused, studying her face. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?"
"Carter Academy," Clara replied simply. 3 years ago. Ellis nodded slowly. "I know Carter's reputation. They don't graduate many shooters who can make that shot." He extended his good hand. "I owe you my life. We all do." Clara shook his hand, feeling the calluses that marked a professional marksman. "Just doing my job." "Like hell," Ellis said with a slight smile. "Your job is folding laundry. This was something else entirely." Brick appeared beside them, his gruff expression softer than Clara had seen it in 3 years. "I was wrong about you," he said bluntly. "Wrong about a lot of things. That was professional work under pressure, combat ready." Before Clara could respond, another figure approached through the dust and noise. Captain Cole, supported by a medic but insisting on walking, made his way toward their position. His left arm was in a sling, and his face was gray with blood loss, but his eyes were clear. "Reyes," he said when he reached them, "I need to know, was that shot luck or skill?" Clara met his gaze directly. "Skill, sir. Maintained through 3 years of unofficial practice." Cole nodded slowly, then did something that surprised everyone present. Despite his wounds, despite the chaos of the evacuation, he raised his right hand in a crisp salute. "Outstanding marksmanship under fire," he said formally. "You saved my team." Clara returned the salute, feeling the weight of recognition from a decorated special operations officer. Around them, other Delta soldiers had gathered, their faces showing the quiet respect that elite units reserved for demonstrated competence. "The shot's on Hawk's helmet cam. Command's going to want to see this." As the wounded were loaded onto the helicopters, Clara found herself surrounded by soldiers who, an hour ago, wouldn't have known her name. Now they were asking about her training, her background, her plans for the future. 3 years in supply, Ellis mused, as medics prepared him for transport. What a waste of talent. Someone's going to have to answer for that. Naya appeared at Clara's elbow, grinning despite the dust and heat. "So much for staying invisible," she said quietly. "Pretty sure your laundry days are over." Clara watched the helicopters lift off, carrying the wounded toward medical care and safety. The immediate crisis was over, but she could sense that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't predict. In her breast pocket, the bullet her instructor had given her 3 years ago felt lighter somehow. Not because she'd completed the mission he'd prepared her for, but because she'd finally proven, to herself and others, that the shooter she'd always been had never really disappeared. She'd just been folding laundry, waiting for the moment when precision mattered more than perception. As they walked back toward the base, Brick fell into step beside her. "So what happens now?" he asked. Clara shouldered the Barrett, feeling its weight distributed perfectly across her frame. "Now we file the after-action report and see what headquarters thinks about supply clerks who can make impossible shots." but she already knew the answer. Word was spreading through the base like wildfire. The quiet girl from laundry had just pulled off one of the longest sniper kills in recent memory. There would be questions, evaluations, probably a formal review of her medical discharge. For the first time in 3 years, Clara Reyes was no longer invisible. Clara had winced at that news. She'd hoped the incident might fade into the background noise of military operations, just another after-action report filed and forgotten. Instead, it seemed to be gaining momentum, spreading through channels she couldn't predict or control. The door to Colonel Hayes' office opened, and his aide, a nervous-looking lieutenant with wire-rimmed glasses, gestured for her to enter. "Specialist Reyes, reporting as ordered, sir," Clara said, standing at attention before the colonel's desk. Colonel Hayes was a career infantry officer with the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades in combat zones. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "At ease, Specialist." He gestured toward a chair. "We need to talk about what happened 3 days ago." Clara remained standing. "Yes, sir?" "Sit down, Reyes. This isn't a disciplinary action." Hayes' tone softened slightly. "At least, not for you." Clara took the offered chair, keeping her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. Hayes opened a file folder on his desk. "I've been reading some interesting reports. Captain Cole's after-action summary describes your marksmanship as exceptional under extreme pressure. Corporal Ellis has submitted a formal commendation request. Sergeant Hanley, who I'm told was initially opposed to your involvement, has written a detailed account of your tactical competence." He paused, looking up from the file. "What I'm struggling to understand is how a supply specialist with a medical discharge for stress-related performance issues managed to execute a precision shot that most of our designated marksmen would consider extremely challenging." Clara had rehearsed this conversation in her mind dozens of times over the past 3 days. "I maintained my marksmanship skills through personal practice, sir. The medical discharge was based on a training incident 3 years ago, but it didn't affect my fundamental shooting ability." "Personal practice?" Hayes' eyebrows raised slightly. "With what weapon? Using what ammunition? Under whose supervision?" The questions Clara had been dreading. Her midnight practice sessions behind the equipment shed were technically unauthorized use of military equipment, a violation that could result in disciplinary action or worse. Before she could answer, Hayes held up his hand. "Before you say anything that might incriminate yourself, let me share something else that came to my attention this morning." He turned his computer monitor toward her. On the screen was a video file, grainy helmet camera footage showing a desert landscape through a rifle scope. Clara watched herself captured through Hawk Ellis's scope as she settled into position behind the stone wall. The video quality was poor, but her movements were clearly visible. The smooth deployment of her bipod, the precise adjustment of her scope, the controlled breathing pattern before the shot. "The interesting thing about this footage," Hayes continued, "is what it reveals about your technique, textbook shooting position, proper scope adjustment, professional breathing control. These aren't skills someone maintains through occasional unauthorized practice." Clara felt her stomach tighten. The video was evidence of competence, but it also raised questions about how she'd maintained that competence. "Sir, I can explain." "You don't need to explain anything, Specialist, because about an hour ago, I received a very interesting phone call from Fort Benning." Clara's pulse quickened. Fort Benning was home to the U.S. Army Marksmanship Unit and various sniper training programs. "It seems that Master Sergeant Rodriguez, your former instructor at Carter Academy, has been following your career with some interest. When news of your shot reached sniper training circles, and yes, word travels fast in that community, he contacted my office directly." Hayes leaned back in his chair. "Rodriguez told me some fascinating things about your time at Carter. Apparently, you were the most naturally gifted marksman he'd seen in 15 years of instruction. Your technical scores were nearly perfect, your precision under controlled conditions was exceptional, and your tactical understanding was well above average for your experience level." Clara remained silent, unsure where this conversation was heading. "He also told me about the training accident that ended your program.
Simulated IED explosion, shrapnel to the shoulder, 4 seconds of struggling to maintain weapon control before medical intervention. Hayes's expression grew serious. 4 seconds. That weren't officially recorded, but which Rodriguez observed personally. Sir? Rodriguez believes your medical discharge was a bureaucratic error based on incomplete information. The reviewing board saw the incident report, dropped weapon, stress response, recommended discharge, but they never saw the context. They never knew that you'd maintained partial weapon control despite significant injury, or that your stress response lasted exactly 4 seconds before you attempted to return to the fight. Clara felt something loosening in her chest, a tension she'd carried for 3 years without fully realizing its weight. The question now, Hayes continued, is what we do with this information, and what we do with you. Before Clara could respond, the colonel's aide knocked and entered without waiting for permission.
Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here from Army Sniper School at Fort Benning, Master Sergeant Rodriguez. He says he has orders to conduct a field evaluation. Hayes smiled for the first time since the conversation began. Send him in, Lieutenant. I think Specialist Reyes is about to have a very interesting afternoon. Master Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez looked exactly as Clara remembered him from Carter Academy. Lean, weathered, with the kind of steady presence that marked career snipers. His uniform bore the badges and patches of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of precision shooting under pressure. Specialist Reyes, he said, extending his hand as he entered Colonel Hayes's office. It's been too long. Clara stood and shook his hand, surprised by the genuine warmth in his voice. At Carter Academy, Rodriguez had been a demanding instructor, pushing his students to levels of performance they didn't know they possessed. She'd never been sure if he'd liked her personally or simply appreciated her technical aptitude. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, she replied, I didn't expect to see you here. Neither did I, until I heard about your shot. Rodriguez turned to Colonel Hayes. Sir, with your permission, I'd like to take Specialist Reyes to your range facility for some practical evaluation. Hayes nodded. The range is yours, Master Sergeant. Whatever you need. 20 minutes later, Clara found herself at the base's small arms range, a modest facility with targets out to 600 meters. It wasn't much compared to the elaborate training ranges at Carter Academy, but it would serve Rodriguez's purposes. Nia had somehow managed to appear at the range, ostensibly to deliver ammunition requisitions, but clearly hoping to witness whatever was about to happen. Even Brick had found reasons to be in the area, checking equipment with unusual thoroughness. Before we begin, Rodriguez said, setting a rifle case on the shooting bench, I want you to understand why I'm here. Your shot 3 days ago has generated significant interest at higher levels. The combination of range, conditions, and tactical pressure makes it noteworthy from a training perspective. He opened the case, revealing a pristine M24 sniper weapon system. More importantly, it raises questions about how we evaluate and utilize marksmanship talent within the Army. Your case suggests that our current assessment methods might be flawed. Clara accepted the rifle, feeling its familiar weight and balance. The M24 was a precision instrument, capable of sub-mititive angle accuracy in the right hands. I'm not here to re-examine your medical discharge. What's done is done. But I am here to evaluate your current capabilities and make recommendations about your future assignment. He gestured toward the range. 600 meters, 10 rounds, no time limit. Show me what you can do under controlled conditions. Clara settled into a prone shooting position. The ritual calm descended as she aligned the rifle scope. 600 meters was well within her comfort zone, even after 3 years away from formal training. She chambered the first round and began her breathing sequence. The first shot broke clean, the rifle's recoil absorbed smoothly by her shooting position. Through the scope, she could see the impact, center mass on the silhouette target. She worked the bolt, chambered the second round, and fired again. 10 shots, 10 hits, all within a 4-inch group at 600 meters. Rodriguez studied the target through a spotting scope, making notes on an evaluation form. Excellent precision. Now, let's try something more challenging. He moved them to a different firing point, and set up a series of targets at varying ranges, 400, 500, and 600 meters, requiring rapid transitions between distances. Engage all targets, 1 round each, in sequence from left to right. Simulate a tactical scenario where you're engaging multiple threats at different ranges. This was more complex, requiring rapid scope adjustments and mental calculations for each target's ballistic requirements. Clara felt the old training take over. Range estimation, wind reading, elevation adjustments made with automatic precision. 3 shots, 3 hits, all within the target's vital zones. "Outstanding," he murmured, making more notes. Now the real test. He produced a timer and set up a more complex scenario. Multiple targets at different ranges, some partially obscured by barriers, requiring precise shot placement to avoid hitting non-threat silhouettes positioned nearby. Time limit, 90 seconds. Engage only the hostile targets, avoid the civilian silhouettes. You'll need to make judgment calls about shot placement based on partial target exposure. This was the kind of complex scenario that separated competent marksmen from exceptional ones. Clara studied the target array, building a mental firing sequence that would optimize her time while ensuring precision. The timer started. Clara moved through the sequence with fluid efficiency. Acquire target, confirm identification, adjust for range and wind, fire, transition to next target. Her movements were economical, her shots precise, her target selection flawless. When the timer stopped, she'd engaged 6 hostile targets while avoiding 3 civilian silhouettes positioned dangerously close to the threat targets.
Rodriguez lowered his spotting scope, a slight smile creasing his weathered features. 90 seconds, 6 targets engaged, 6 hits, 0 civilian casualties. That's instructor-level performance. Clara safetied the rifle and looked up from her shooting position. "Thank you, Master Sergeant." "Don't thank me yet," Rodriguez replied, "because now comes the real question. What do you want to do with these skills?" The question hung in the desert air like heat shimmer. Clara had spent 3 years convinced that her marksmanship career was over, that she'd be folding laundry until her enlistment ended. Now, suddenly, possibilities were opening that she'd never allowed herself to consider. "I want to use them properly," she said quietly. "I want to train others. I want to make sure that shooters with potential don't get lost in bureaucratic mistakes." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "That's what I hoped you'd say." He pulled out an official-looking document. "This is a letter of recommendation for assignment to the Advanced Marksmanship Training Unit at Fort Benning. It's an instructor position that would put you in charge of training scenarios exactly like the one that ended your original program." Clara stared at the document, hardly believing what she was reading. The position comes with promotion to sergeant and reassignment to a training environment where your technical skills and tactical understanding can be properly utilized. Rodriguez's expression grew serious. It also comes with the responsibility of identifying and developing marksmen who might otherwise be overlooked by conventional assessment methods. Behind them, Clara could hear Naya practically vibrating with excitement, though she was trying to maintain professional composure. "There's one condition," Rodriguez added. "You'll need to complete a compressed certification program to update your instructor qualifications. 6 weeks of intensive training to cover everything that's changed in sniper doctrine over the past 3 years." Clara looked down at the rifle in her hands, then back at the targets she'd just engaged with precision that surprised even her. For 3 years, she'd maintained her skills in secret, practicing in darkness, keeping alive the abilities that an official evaluation had deemed worthless. "I accept," she said. Rodriguez smiled, a genuine expression of satisfaction. "Outstanding. Report to Fort Benning in 2 weeks for program initiation." As they packed up the equipment, Naya finally couldn't contain herself. "Clara, this is incredible! You're going to be training snipers!" "I'm going to be training people," Clara corrected. "Some of them will become snipers. Others might discover they have different talents. The important thing is making sure we don't lose good soldiers to bureaucratic oversights." Brick appeared as they finished cleaning the rifles. "Heard you're leaving us for bigger things," he said gruffly. "In 2 weeks," Clara confirmed.
Well, it's been an honor working with you, even if I didn't realize what I was working with until recently. Clara shook his hand, feeling the respect in his grip. Thank you for covering my back out there and for trusting me when it mattered. As they walked back toward the base, Rodriguez fell into step beside her. One more thing, he said, reaching into his pocket. This, I believe, belongs to you. He handed her a single brass cartridge, the training round he'd given her 3 years ago at Carter Academy. You told me to fire it only when I was certain it would save a life, Clara said, turning the bullet over in her fingers. And you did exactly that, Rodriguez replied. That round served its purpose when you made the shot that saved Delta Team. Now it's time to pass that responsibility to someone else. Clara understood. The bullet had been more than ammunition. It had been a symbol of trust, of potential, of the responsibility that came with lethal precision. Soon, she'd be in a position to offer that same trust to other soldiers who might be struggling to prove themselves. I won't let you down, she said. You already haven't. Now it's time to make sure others get the same chance you did. 6 months later. The advanced marksmanship training facility at Fort Benning buzzed with the controlled energy of soldiers pushing themselves to their limits. Sergeant Clara Reyes stood at the edge of the 1,000-meter range, watching a new class of sniper trainees work through their final qualification exercises. The morning Georgia sun was already intense, but Clara barely noticed the heat. Her attention was focused on the young soldier in Lane 7, Private First Class Marcus Webb, 20 years old, from a small town in Iowa. His shooting position was textbook perfect, his breathing controlled, his equipment properly maintained. But Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands that spoke of mounting pressure. Webb had been struggling with the psychological aspects of precision shooting despite excellent technical skills. His groupings under controlled conditions were exceptional, but when time pressure or tactical scenarios were introduced, his performance deteriorated rapidly. The other instructors were beginning to suggest that he might not be suitable for sniper training.
Clara had seen this pattern before. In fact, she'd lived it. "Range is hot," called the range safety officer. "Commence final qualification sequence." Webb settled behind his rifle, adjusting his scope for the 1,000-meter shot that would determine whether he graduated from the program or was reassigned to conventional infantry. Clara watched his breathing pattern, saw the moment when confidence gave way to anxiety. His first shot missed the target entirely. Webb worked his bolt action with mechanical precision, but Clara could see his composure cracking. His second shot hit the target but outside the qualification zone. One more miss and he'd be eliminated from the program. Clara made a decision. "Cease fire," she called, walking toward Webb's position. "Stand down for instructor consultation." Webb looked up from his rifle, his face flushed with frustration and embarrassment. "Sergeant, I can make this shot." "I just need—" "Private Webb," Clara interrupted gently. "Walk with me." She led him away from the firing line to a quiet area behind the range building. Other instructors watched with curiosity. It was unusual to interrupt a qualification exercise for individual counseling. "Tell me about your first day of training," Clara said, settling onto a bench in the shade. Webb looked confused by the question. "Ma'am, your very first day here, what were you thinking when you arrived?" I wanted to be the best sniper in the Army. I grew up hunting with my grandfather. He taught me that precision shooting was about more than just hitting targets. It was about responsibility, discipline, respect for the weapon and the task. Clara nodded. "And now?" "Now I'm afraid I'm going to wash out. Every time I get behind the rifle for a qualification, I think about failing, about letting down my grandfather, about not being good enough. The more I think about it, the worse my shooting gets." Clara reached into her breast pocket and pulled out a single brass cartridge. Webb's eyes focused on it with the attention that all shooters gave to ammunition. 3 years ago, I was eliminated from sniper training. Training accident, panic response, medical discharge. For 3 years, I folded laundry at a forward operating base while maintaining my shooting skills in secret. Webb's eyes widened. This wasn't the kind of story instructors usually shared with struggling students. Then one day, a Delta Force commander stumbled into my laundry tent, bleeding from a gunshot wound, carrying a sniper rifle. His team was pinned down by an enemy marksman, and he needed someone who could make an impossible shot. I turned the bullet over in my fingers, feeling its familiar weight. My instructor at Carter Academy gave me this round 6 years ago. He told me to fire it only when I was certain it would save a life. I carried it for 3 years, thinking I'd never get the chance to use it properly. "Did you make the shot?" asked Webb, though he could guess the answer from Clara's presence here. 1,200 meters, partially concealed target, variable wind conditions, extreme time pressure. Single shot, center mass. The enemy sniper went down, and the Delta team made it home. She held up the cartridge. This bullet taught me something important. The weapon doesn't make the shooter, and neither do the circumstances. The shooter makes the shooter. All the external pressure, all the doubt, all the fear, none of that matters when you settle into your shooting position and remember what you're trained to do. Webb stared at the brass round, beginning to understand. The shot that saved those soldiers wasn't about proving I was good enough. It was about accepting that I'd always been good enough, regardless of what official evaluations said. The skills were there. The training was there. I just needed to trust them. She pressed the bullet into Webb's palm. "I'm giving this to you now, not because I think you need magical ammunition, but because I think you need to remember something. You earned your place in this program. Your skills got you here. The only thing standing between you and success is the voice in your head telling you that you're not worthy of it." Webb closed his fingers around the cartridge, his expression shifting from anxiety to something like resolve. "Fire this round only when you're certain it will save a life," Clara said, echoing her instructor's words from years before. "But remember, sometimes the life you save might be your own career, your own confidence, your own future. Those count too." They walked back to the firing line in silence. Webb took his position, the brass cartridge now secured in his breast pocket. Clara watched as he settled behind his rifle, noting the change in his posture, the steadiness that had replaced the tremor in his hands.
"Range is hot," the safety officer called. "Resume qualification sequence." Webb's breathing fell into the controlled rhythm of professional marksmanship. Clara could see the moment when his training took over, when the external pressure faded and only the fundamentals remained. His shot broke clean and true. Through the spotting scope, Clara watched the bullet impact dead center of the qualification zone. Webb worked his bolt, chambered his final round, and fired again. Another perfect hit. "Qualification complete," the range officer announced. "Private Webb has successfully completed sniper training with a score of 96%. As Webb stood and safetied his rifle, Clara saw him touch his breast pocket where the bullet rested. He turned toward her and nodded once, a gesture of understanding that passed between two shooters who'd learned the same lesson about trust, preparation, and the quiet confidence that came with accepting your own capabilities. Later, as the training day ended and students cleaned their equipment, Clara stood in her office reviewing the graduation roster. Webb's name was there, along with 11 other soldiers who'd proven themselves worthy of the precision marksman designation. Through her window, she could see the 1,000-meter range where tomorrow's class would begin their own journey toward competence and confidence. Some would succeed immediately, others would struggle. A few might need the kind of intervention that Clara herself had once required. On her desk lay a new brass cartridge, one of many she kept for students who needed to remember that potential and performance weren't always the same thing.
Each bullet carried the same message her instructor had given her. Trust your training, accept your capabilities, and fire only when you're certain it will save a life. Outside, the setting sun painted the Georgia sky in shades of orange and gold. In a few hours, Clara would begin preparing lesson plans for tomorrow's instruction, reviewing student files, maintaining the endless cycle of training that turned raw recruits into precision marksmen. But for now, she simply stood at her window, watching the empty range, and remembering a canvas laundry tent where a wounded Delta Force commander had trusted her with a rifle and a mission that changed everything. The bullet's lesson lived on, passed from instructor to student, from one generation of marksmen to the next. Sometimes the most important shot you'll ever take is the one that proves you were capable all along.
Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.